Welcome to this explainer. Let's just start with a fundamental truth, all right? The hospitality and tourism sectors operate in this incredibly high-wire, interconnected environment. And because of that, they are constantly vulnerable to unexpected crises. We all saw the devastating long-term impacts of the 2020 global pandemic, right? Not to mention the natural disasters or sudden economic shifts that pop up out of nowhere. So today, we are going to unpack exactly how businesses can build a strategic, reliable shield against these kinds of devastating events. I really love how the source material frames a crisis here. It's not just defined as a danger, it's fundamentally a critical decision point for a business. It's that pivotal, do-or-die moment where the choices you make determine whether your doors stay open or close permanently. And to survive those high-stakes decision points, you know you need way more than just gut instinct. You need risk management. Think of this as a systematic process, a planned, proactive shield against threats stemming from financial uncertainty, legal liabilities, strategic errors, or even natural disasters. The whole goal is to minimize risks and extra costs before they actually have a chance to happen.
We've got a really clear roadmap for our discussion today. We're going to start with the hospitality risk landscape, walk through the risk management process, cover handling strategies, address limitations and global standards, and finally, dive into food safety and crisis communication. Let's get into it.
Okay, Section 1, the hospitality risk landscape. Because hospitality relies on such high employee turnover and a huge proportion of part-time staff, operators are literally fighting on multiple fronts every single day. I mean, think about it. You've got foodborne illnesses like Salmonella, E. coli, and norovirus, which can shut a property down overnight and trigger massive compensation claims. You've got alcohol-fueled behavior putting your staff in harm's way. There's transportation liability. If your outsourced shuttle driver gets in a crash, you could absolutely be on the hook for that. Plus, when businesses scale back on-premises security to save a few bucks, liability completely skyrockets. And finally, cybersecurity. Hospitality firms are prime targets for cybercrime simply because they constantly process credit card data. It's a lot to handle.
Which brings us to Section 2, the risk management process. With all of these severe threats constantly looming over daily operations, a business owner kind of has to play detective and actively hunt down vulnerabilities. Before taking any concrete action, every good strategic plan has to start by conceptualizing the worst-case scenarios. You basically have to ask yourself, what exactly can go wrong in this workplace, and what is the probability and scale of its impact? Are we talking about a minor hiccup or a totally business-ending catastrophe? So phase 1 of this detective work is establishing the context and the criteria for evaluating risk. Step 2 is identification, literally defining the potential threats that could derail a project. And step 3 is risk analysis, which is where you determine the actual odds of those risks occurring and the specific real-world consequences they carry. From there, this builds right into action. Step 4 is assessing whether the company is actually willing to take on the risk based on its specific risk appetite. Then, in Step 5, we hit mitigation. This is where we develop concrete plans and preventative tactics to alleviate those high-ranked risks. But it doesn't just stop there. Step 6 requires continuously monitoring new and existing risks. And Step 7 ensures you communicate and consult with internal and external stakeholders throughout the entire process. And once specific risks are identified and analyzed through this 7-step process, well, companies have to decide exactly how they're going to confront them.
And that takes us to Section 3, strategies for handling risk.
So here are your 4 primary strategic options broken down. First up, risk avoidance. This is trying to deflect threats to completely avoid disruptive consequences. Though, let's be real, complete elimination is pretty rare. Second is risk reduction. This means adjusting your processes to just minimize the scope of the damage. Third, risk sharing, distributing the consequences with a business partner or a third-party vendor. And finally, risk retaining. Actually, this strategy is super fascinating because it's a bit counterintuitive. Sometimes the company decides a risk is actually worth it. If the anticipated profit of a project is greater than the potential cost of the risk, they simply accept it and move forward. It's a calculated gamble.
Moving on to Section 4, limitations and global standards. Now, while risk management is an extremely beneficial, absolutely essential practice, we need to be clear, it is not a magic bullet. It's vital to remember that these risk models aren't perfect. Gathering data for simulations can be incredibly expensive and time-consuming. It requires trained personnel with comprehensive skills just to analyze the complex software outputs. Worse, it can create a false sense of stability. Value-at-risk measures often focus on the past instead of the future, which actually makes a sudden downturn more likely. And it can create a very dangerous illusion of control. This causes organizations to neglect completely novel, unexpected risks because they mistakenly believe their models perfectly quantify everything.
To counter those very real illusions and limitations, organizations worldwide turn to recognized benchmarks to improve their internal frameworks. Two major bodies highlighted in our sources are the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and the International Organization for Standardization, specifically the ISO 31000 principles. Now, the ISO 31000 principles make a really crucial point. Risk management shouldn't just be a checklist or some isolated chore. It must create value and be a fully integral part of the overall decision-making process. It has to explicitly address uncertainty, be based on the best available information, and importantly, it absolutely must take human factors and potential errors into account. The whole thing is meant to be a transparent, adaptable, and continuously monitored framework that can fit literally any organization, regardless of its size.
All right, Section 5, Food Safety and Communication.
Let's pivot from the macro business standards into the zero margin for error world of food safety. Because foodborne illness is such a massive, visceral threat in the hospitality industry, there's an entirely separate framework specifically built for it. Our sources outline the 8 general principles of food safety risk management.
Of those 8 principles, Principle 2 really stands out as a game changer. Unlike general business risks where you might weigh a potential profit against a potential loss, when dealing with food, the protection of human health must be the primary consideration. It absolutely overrides economic costs or societal preferences. No exceptions. Furthermore, these principles demand that decisions be completely transparent, that scientific integrity is rigorously maintained by keeping risk management and risk assessment functionally separate, and that any uncertainty in risk estimates is clearly communicated. And that brings us to the final piece of the whole puzzle, risk communication. You see, all of this preparation is totally useless if you can't communicate it during an actual crisis. And this isn't just about PR spin. It's about promoting real awareness among your employees and your consumers. It's about ensuring consistency and clarity in the process, providing a clear understanding for management decisions, strengthening relationships, and exchanging vital knowledge and practices when it matters most. So to wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider this final thought. We've seen that a crisis is fundamentally a time for challenging decisions. You know the risks, you know the processes, and you know the standards. But if the unexpected happens today, like a viral outbreak, a cyber attack, or a natural disaster, are you actually prepared to clearly and transparently communicate your way out of it? It's a question every focused leader needs to answer way before the crisis actually arrives.